Rancher found a beautiful girl left for dead in the canyon. Saving her sparked a tribal war. Welcome back to our channel, where stories of courage, love, and survival come alive. Today, we're taking you deep into the rugged canyons of the Old West, where one man's act of mercy ignited a conflict that would change everything. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single episode. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening to this incredible story? Are you in Texas, California, maybe across the ocean in Europe or Asia? We love hearing from our global family. Now, settle in as we journey back to 1882, where the desert winds carry secrets and every decision can mean the difference between life and death. This is a story about Samuel Hayes, a weathered rancher whose world was about to be turned upside down by a discovery that would test his honor, his courage, and his very survival. Chapter 1. The Discovery. The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Samuel Hayes guided his horse, Thunder, along the rocky edge of Devil's Canyon. At 42, Samuel had weathered 20 years in this unforgiving territory, his hands calloused from rope burns, and his eyes perpetually squinted against the desert glare. His weathered face told stories of countless storms survived and battles won, but today something felt different. The cattle had been restless for days, and 3 head had wandered off during the night. Samuel's ranch, the Broken Arrow, sat on valuable grazing land that bordered both Mexican territory and Apache hunting grounds, a position that had brought him prosperity, but also constant vigilance. As Thunder picked his way carefully down the canyon's winding path, Samuel's sharp eyes caught something unusual among the red rocks below, a splash of blue fabric against the rust-colored stone, too bright to be natural. He dismounted, his boots crunching on loose gravel as he made his way down the steep embankment. What he found made his breath catch in his throat. A young woman lay motionless on a narrow ledge, her long black hair fanned across the rocks like spilled ink. Her dress, once a beautiful blue calico, was torn and stained with blood. She couldn't have been more than 20, with delicate features that spoke of mixed heritage, perhaps Mexican and Native American. But what struck Samuel most was that she was still breathing, though barely. "Jesus," he whispered, immediately checking for broken bones. Her pulse was weak but steady. A nasty gash on her forehead had bled considerably, and her left arm hung at an odd angle, but she was alive. Samuel looked around the canyon walls, trying to piece together what had happened. This wasn't an accident. The girl's position suggested she'd been thrown from above, left for dead in this remote place where only the vultures would find her. As he carefully lifted her in his arms, her eyes fluttered open, deep brown, like polished mahogany, filled with fear and confusion. "Don't, please," she whispered in accented English, trying weakly to push away from him. "Easy now," Samuel said gently, his voice rough from years of shouting over cattle and wind. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe." She studied his face with those intelligent eyes, as if weighing whether to trust this stranger. Something in his weathered features must have reassured her, because she stopped struggling and allowed him to carry her up to where Thunder waited patiently. The ride back to the Broken Arrow took nearly 2 hours, Samuel holding the unconscious girl carefully while guiding Thunder with his knees. His mind raced with questions and concerns. Who was she? Who had done this to her? And perhaps most importantly, what kind of trouble was he bringing to his doorstep? The Broken Arrow ranch house sat in a valley surrounded by red mesas, a sturdy adobe structure that Samuel had built with his own hands after the war. His foreman, Jake Morrison, was breaking horses in the corral when he spotted them approaching. "Boss!" Jake called out, dropping his rope and jogging over. "What in tarnation?" "Found her in Devil's Canyon," Samuel said grimly, dismounting while carefully cradling the girl. "Get Maria. We need to tend to her wounds." Maria Santos, the ranch cook and the closest thing to a doctor for 50 miles, emerged from the kitchen wiping her hands on her apron. A stout Mexican woman in her 50s, she took one look at the unconscious girl and immediately took charge. "Bring her to the spare room," she commanded, leading the way. "Jake, get my medical supplies and heat water. Lots of it." As they settled the girl on the narrow bed, Maria began her examination with practiced efficiency. "Broken arm, concussion, cuts and bruises," she diagnosed. "Okay, but she'll live if infection doesn't set in." "Any idea who she might be?" Samuel asked, watching as Maria cleaned the head wound. "Look at her clothes." "Her jewelry," Maria said, pointing to the silver bracelet on the girl's uninjured wrist. "This is Apache work, but mixed with Mexican influence. She could be from any of the settlements between here and the border." Samuel studied the intricate silverwork, noting the craftsmanship. This wasn't the jewelry of a poor woman. Someone would be looking for her. As if reading his thoughts, Maria fixed him with a stern look. "You did the right thing. bringing her here. But Samuel, you know this territory. A girl like this doesn't end up in Devil's Canyon by accident. That evening, as the desert cooled and painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Samuel sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, thinking about the day's events. The girl, who still hadn't awakened long enough to tell them her name, represented a mystery that could bring danger to his doorstep. He'd worked too hard building the broken arrow to see it destroyed by someone else's troubles, but looking into those frightened brown eyes had stirred something in him that he'd thought buried with his late wife, Catherine, 5 years ago. Thunder nickered softly from the corral, and Samuel looked up to see a dust cloud on the horizon. Riders, moving fast in the fading light. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt 45 at his hip as he counted the silhouettes. 5 men, riding hard toward the ranch. "Jake!" he called out. His foreman appeared at the barn door, rifle already in hand. They'd worked together long enough that Jake could read trouble in Samuel's voice. The riders pulled up in the ranch yard in a cloud of dust and jingling spurs. Samuel recognized the leader immediately. Tom Brennan, a local rancher whose spread bordered his to the south, but Brennan's usual easy smile was nowhere to be seen. "Evening, Tom," Samuel said carefully, remaining seated, but ready to move quickly if needed. "Samuel," Brennan's voice was tight with tension. "We're tracking some rustlers who hit my place last night. Trail leads this way. You seen anything unusual?" Samuel's eyes flicked to the other riders, rough men he didn't recognize, all armed and watching him intently. "Just been working my own stock." "What exactly are you looking for?" "Cattle thieves," one of the other men spoke up. A thin man with cold eyes and a badly healed scar across his cheek. "And maybe worse. You hiding anything we should know about?" Hayes. The threat in the man's voice was unmistakable. Samuel stood slowly, his hand near his gun. "I don't appreciate the tone, friend, and I don't know who you are to be asking questions on my land." Brennan held up a hand to forestall trouble. "This is Deputy Marshal Crawford from Tucson. We got word that some Apache raiders hit a settlement near the border 2 days ago, took some livestock and a girl." Samuel kept his face neutral, but his heart began to race. "Sorry to hear it. Hope you find what you're looking for." Crawford's cold eyes fixed on him. "Mind if we look around, just to be thorough?" "I mind plenty," Samuel replied evenly. "You got a warrant, Marshal." The tension stretched like a bowstring about to snap. Jake had moved closer, and Samuel could see Maria watching from the kitchen window. 5 against 2 weren't good odds, but Samuel had faced worse. Finally, Brennan spoke up. "No need for trouble here. We'll be moving on." He shot Crawford a warning look. "Thanks for your time, Samuel." As the riders wheeled their horses and headed back into the gathering darkness, Samuel felt the weight of the decision he'd made. He was harboring someone these men were looking for, and if they discovered the truth, it would mean trouble for everyone at the Broken Arrow. But as he looked back toward the house where the mysterious girl lay recovering, he knew he'd made the only choice his conscience would allow. Whatever storm was coming, he'd weather it as he had all the others. He just prayed it wouldn't destroy everything he'd built in the process. Chapter 2. Awakening Secrets. The first light of dawn was creeping through the windows when Samuel heard the soft voice calling from the spare room. He'd spent most of the night on the porch, keeping watch, his rifle across his knees. The visit from Crawford and his men had left him uneasy. "Maria!" the voice called again, weak but clear. Samuel found Maria already bustling into the room with a bowl of broth. The girl was awake, propped up against the pillows, her dark hair braided back to reveal the bandage on her forehead. In the morning light, Samuel could see she was even more beautiful than he'd first thought, with high cheekbones and skin the color of burnished copper. "Buenos dias," Maria said gently, setting the bowl on the bedside table. "How do you feel, mija?" "Like I was trampled by wild horses," the girl replied with a weak smile. Her English was perfect, though accented with the musical lilt of Spanish. Her eyes found Samuel standing in the doorway. You're the one who found me." Samuel stepped into the room, removing his hat. "Name's Samuel Hayes. This is my ranch. And you are?" She hesitated, and Samuel caught the flicker of fear that crossed her features. My name is Ayana. Ayana Delgado." "Well, Miss Delgado, you gave us quite a scare. What happened to you out there in Devil's Canyon?" Ayana's face went pale, and her good hand instinctively moved to her throat. I don't remember much. I was traveling with my escort. We were attacked." Her voice broke slightly. "They killed everyone. I thought they were going to kill me too." Maria placed a comforting hand on the girl's shoulder. "You're safe now, child. But we need to know, do you have family? People who will be looking for you?" The question seemed to agitate Ayana. She struggled to sit up straighter, wincing as the movement jarred her broken arm. My father is chief running bear of the Chiricahua Apache. My mother was Mexican, from Sonora. I was traveling to meet with, she paused, as if deciding how much to reveal. I was traveling on tribal business. Samuel felt his blood run cold. Chief Running Bear was known throughout the territory, a powerful leader who'd managed to keep his people free, while other Apache bands had been forced onto reservations. If this girl was his daughter, Miss Delgado, Samuel said carefully, there were men here last night, a marshal from Tucson looking for cattle thieves. They mentioned Apache raiders and a missing girl. Ayana's eyes widened with alarm. They weren't raiders. They were white men, outlaws who attacked our party. They wanted... She stopped, her face flushing with anger and shame. Wanted what? Samuel pressed gently. They wanted to sell me, she whispered, the words barely audible. There are men who pay high prices for Apache women, especially the daughter of a chief. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the mantel clock. Samuel's jaw clenched as the full picture became clear. Slave traders. One of the vilest breeds of men who infested the borderlands. They'd killed her escort and planned to sell her to the highest bidder. When she'd fought back or tried to escape, they'd thrown her into the canyon, thinking her dead. How many men attacked you? Samuel asked. 6 or 7, led by a thin man with a scar on his face and cold eyes like a snake. Samuel exchanged glances with Maria. Crawford, the man posing as a deputy marshal, was actually leading the gang that had taken Ayana, and now he knew she was here. Mr. Hayes, Ayana said urgently, trying to rise from the bed despite Maria's protests. You don't understand. If my father thinks I'm dead, if he believes white men killed me, there will be war, real war. He's been holding back the young warriors who want to fight. But if something happens to me... Easy now, Samuel said, gently pressing her back against the pillows. You're in no condition to go anywhere, and we're not about to hand you over to those animals. But you don't know what you're doing. Ayana's eyes flashed with desperate urgency. My father has over 100 warriors. If he rides to war, innocent people will die. Women, children, people who had nothing to do with this. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, weighing their options. Outside, he could hear Jake calling to the horses, and the normal sounds of ranch life beginning. But normalcy was an illusion now. They were sitting on a powder keg that could explode at any moment. How long before your father expects you back? He asked. So I was supposed to reach Fort Bowie 2 days ago. He'll already be worried. Ayana's voice was strained with pain and anxiety. Please, Mr. Hayes, I understand if you can't help me, but at least let me send word that I'm alive. My father's scout, Grey Wolf, will be watching the fort. If I could just get a message to him. Samuel made his decision. Jake, he called out. His foreman appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. Yeah, boss. Saddle Lightning. I need you to ride to Fort Bowie, fast as you can make it. Jake nodded without question, but Samuel could see the worry in his weathered face. What message you want me to deliver? Samuel looked at Ayana. What do I tell him? Tell Grey Wolf that the morning star still shines, Ayana said. He'll understand, and tell him to bring 2 warriors. No more. Too many men will attract attention. As Jake hurried out to prepare for the ride, Samuel turned back to Ayana. You realize what you're asking of me. If Crawford comes back with more men, I know, she said quietly. You could have left me in that canyon. Why didn't you? Samuel was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the rugged landscape he'd called home for 20 years. Because some things are worth fighting for, even if it cost you everything. That afternoon, Samuel was repairing fence line when he spotted the dust cloud again. This time, it was bigger. At least 10 riders coming hard from the south. He dropped his tools and ran for the house, his heart pounding. Maria, get Ayana hidden now! They'd prepared for this possibility. There was a root cellar beneath the kitchen that could be accessed through a hidden panel. Maria helped Ayana down into the cramped space just as the riders thundered into the yard. Crawford sat his horse like a man who owned the world, his cold eyes surveying the ranch with predatory interest. The men with him were clearly hired guns, hard-faced killers with tied-down holsters and calculating stares. Mr. Hayes, Crawford called out, not bothering to dismount. We meet again. Marshal, Samuel replied evenly, standing on his porch with his hands visible but ready to move. Thought you were tracking rustlers. We were. Found their trail leading right to your property. Crawford's smile was like a rattlesnake's warning. Amazing thing about tracking. Tells you all sorts of interesting stories. One of the gunmen spurred his horse closer. Found something, Marshal. Over by that rocky outcrop. Samuel's blood turned to ice as he saw what the man was holding. A piece of blue calico fabric, torn from Ayana's dress. Crawford examined the cloth with theatrical interest. Now, this is curious. Same color as the dress our missing girl was wearing. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Hayes? Could have blown in from anywhere, Samuel said, though he knew the game was up. Could have, Crawford agreed, but I don't think so. He gestured to his men and they began to spread out, surrounding the house. See, the thing about stolen property is that it's a crime to harbor it. And in the eyes of the law, that Apache girl is stolen property. Samuel's hand moved slowly toward his gun. The only thing I see stolen around here is the badge you're wearing, Crawford. The false marshal's mask finally slipped, revealing the cold killer beneath. Smart man. Too smart for your own good. He raised his voice so his men could hear. Tear this place apart. Find the girl. That's when the shooting started. Samuel drew and fired in one smooth motion, his bullet taking one of the gunmen out of his saddle. He dove behind a water trough as return fire splintered the wood around him. From the house, he could hear Maria screaming and the crash of furniture being overturned. The battle was fierce but brief. Samuel was outnumbered, but he knew every inch of his property. He used the buildings and corrals for cover, making every shot count. But he was running low on ammunition when he heard the war cry that froze his blood. From the ridge above the ranch, Apache warriors appeared as if materialized from the rocks themselves. Grey Wolf had arrived with more than the 2 men Ayana had requested. He'd brought 20. The tide of battle turned instantly. Crawford's men, caught between Samuel's position and the Apache attack from above, found themselves in a deadly crossfire. Some tried to run, but the warriors were mounted on swift ponies and knew the terrain like their ancestors. When the shooting stopped, 7 of Crawford's men lay dead in the ranch yard. Crawford himself had taken a bullet through the shoulder, but was still alive, blood staining his shirt as Grey Wolf held a knife to his throat. Samuel emerged from cover, his ears ringing from gunfire, to find Ayana standing in the doorway supported by Maria. Despite her injuries, she spoke rapidly to Grey Wolf in Apache, her voice carrying the authority of her father's daughter. Grey Wolf, a lean warrior with graying hair and intelligent eyes, listened intently before responding. The conversation was brief, but heated. Finally, he nodded and stepped back from Crawford. "My father?" Ayana asked in English. "He rides with 50 warriors," Grey Wolf replied, his English heavily accented but clear. "He believes you dead. He plans to burn every ranch from here to Fort Bowie." Ayana closed her eyes in despair. "How long do we have?" "They reach here by sunset." Samuel looked at the setting sun, already painting the sky blood red. In a few hours, Chief Running Bear would arrive expecting to find his daughter's killers. Instead, he'd find her alive but wounded, in the care of the very people he'd come to destroy. The powder keg was about to explode, and Samuel was standing right on top of it. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. The sun hung like a blood orange on the western horizon when they felt it, the thunder of hoofbeats that seemed to make the very earth tremble. Samuel stood in his ranch yard, surrounded by the bodies of Crawford's men, knowing that in minutes he would face the most dangerous moment of his life. Grey Wolf moved with practiced efficiency, directing his warriors to defensive positions around the ranch buildings, but Samuel could see the conflict in the older warrior's eyes. These weren't enemies approaching. This was his chief, his friend, coming for what he believed was righteous vengeance. "Find Grey Wolf," Samuel said quietly. "When Chief Running Bear gets here, let me talk to him first." The Apache warrior looked at him with something that might have been respect. "You are brave, white man, but my chief's heart is black with grief. He may not listen to words." Ayana struggled to stand straighter despite her injuries, her face pale but determined. "He'll listen to me." "You're in no condition," Samuel started to protest. "Mr. Hayes," she interrupted, her voice carrying the steel of her father's bloodline. 50 Apache warriors are about to attack your ranch. The only thing that can stop them is seeing that I'm alive. I won't hide while good men die for my sake." Before Samuel could argue further, the first Apache riders crested the hill. They came like a force of nature, painted warriors on swift ponies, their war cries echoing off the canyon walls. At their head rode a man who could only be Chief Running Bear. Even at a distance, Samuel could see the chief's commanding presence, tall and broad-shouldered, with long black hair streaked with silver. He wore the traditional war paint of his people and carried a rifle with the casual ease of a man who'd been fighting for 40 years. But it was his eyes that made Samuel's blood run cold. They burned with the fury of a father who believed his child had been murdered. The war party pulled up just outside rifle range, their horses prancing and snorting in the desert air. Chief Running Bear rode forward alone, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. "I am Running Bear of the Chiricahua. I come for the men who killed my daughter. Send them out, and I will make their deaths swift." Samuel stepped forward, very aware that 100 rifle barrels were trained on him. "Chief Running Bear, I am Samuel Hayes. Your daughter lives. She is here, safe." The chief's face showed no change of expression, but Samuel saw his hand tighten on his rifle. "You lie, white man. My daughter would never willingly stay in the house of her enemies." "Because I'm not your enemy," Samuel called back. "Grey Wolf, "Tell your chief what you found here." Grey Wolf rode out to meet his leader, and the two men spoke rapidly in Apache. Samuel watched Running Bear's face as Grey Wolf gestured toward the dead men scattered around the ranch yard, explaining what had really happened. The chief's expression shifted from fury to confusion to something that might have been hope, but before he could respond, Ayana appeared in the ranch house doorway. "Ata!" she called out, using the Apache word for father. Her voice was weak but carried clearly in the still air. "I am here. I am alive." The effect on Chief Running Bear was instantaneous. The stone mask of the war leader cracked, revealing the anguished father beneath. He spurred his horse forward, his warriors following, but Samuel could see the change in their posture. They were no longer attacking. They were coming to reclaim their lost daughter. Running Bear leaped from his horse and strode toward the house, his eyes never leaving Ayana's face. When he reached her, he gathered her carefully in his arms, mindful of her injuries, and Samuel heard him whisper something in Apache that made her tears flow freely. The reunion was brief but intensely emotional. When Running Bear finally looked up, his eyes found Samuel's, and the rancher saw a depth of gratitude that no words could express. "You saved my daughter," the chief said in perfect English, his voice thick with emotion. "Any decent man would have done the same," Samuel replied. Running Bear studied him for a long moment. "No, not any man. Many would have left her to die, rather than risk trouble with my people." He gestured toward the bodies of Crawford's men. "Grey Wolf tells me these are the ones who took her. Their leader is still alive," Samuel said, nodding toward Crawford, who sat propped against a fence post with his hands bound. "He was posing as a federal marshal, but he's nothing but a slave trader." The chief's face darkened as he approached Crawford. The wounded man looked up with defiant eyes, though Samuel could see the fear beneath his bravado. "You know who I am?" Running Bear asked quietly. Crawford spat blood into the dust. "I know you're a savage who needs to be put on a reservation with the rest of your kind." The words had barely left his mouth when Running Bear's knife was at his throat. The chief spoke in a voice like winter wind. "You took my daughter to sell like an animal. You killed her escorts, good men with families. You would have brought war to this land with your lies. The law," Crawford started to say. "There is no law for men like you." Running Bear cut him off. "But I will not dirty my blade with your blood on this man's land." He gestured toward Samuel. "He has shown honor. You have shown none." What happened next surprised everyone. Instead of killing Crawford, Running Bear stood and walked away. "Grey Wolf, take this man to Fort Bowie. Let the real law decide his fate." As the warriors secured Crawford for transport, Samuel found himself alone with the chief. Running Bear looked around the ranch, taking in the solid buildings, the well-tended corrals, the signs of honest hard work. "You have built something good here," he said finally. "Took me 20 years. Samuel replied. "Nearly lost it all today. But you risked it anyway. For a stranger, for my daughter." Running Bear was quiet for a moment. There is an old Apache saying, when someone saves a life, they become responsible for that life. But it works both ways. That life becomes responsible for them as well. Samuel wasn't sure what the chief meant, but something in his tone suggested this conversation was far from over. Ayana appeared beside them, supported by Maria but walking on her own. "Father, this man and his people showed me nothing but kindness. When the slave traders came looking for me, he could have turned me over. Instead, he fought them." Running Bear nodded slowly. "I see this. But daughter, your presence here has brought danger to his doorstep. There will be others who come looking, not just outlaws, but soldiers. The government will want to know why Apache warriors were seen at a white man's ranch." The truth of his words hit Samuel like a physical blow. In the territorial government's eyes, any association with hostile Apache would be seen as treasonous. Colonel Mackenzie at Fort Bowie had been looking for an excuse to clear more ranchers off Apache lands. This could be the pretext he needed. "There's more," Running Bear continued grimly. "Word of today's battle will spread. There are those in my tribe who will see this as proof that we can defeat the white soldiers. Young warriors who hunger for war will say that if we can rescue one daughter, we can rescue our people's freedom." Samuel felt the weight of unintended consequences settling on his shoulders. By saving one life, had he doomed dozens of others? "What do you suggest?" he asked. Running Bear looked at his daughter, then back at Samuel. "There is a way, but it will require trust between our peoples, something that has been rare in this land. I'm listening. In 2 days, there will be a peace council at Dragoon Springs. Colonel Mackenzie will be there, along with representatives from Washington. They want to convince my people to move to the San Carlos reservation." The chief's voice carried years of weariness. "I've been considering it, not because I want to, but because I fear the alternative is the destruction of my people." Samuel began to understand. "You want me to speak for you, to tell them what really happened here. More than that, I want you to stand with me, to show the army that there can be peace between Apache and white settlers, that we are not all enemies. It was a dangerous proposition. Speaking for the Apache at a government peace council could destroy Samuel's standing in the territorial community. But looking at Ayana, seeing the hope in her eyes, he knew he had already made his choice. "I'll do it," he said simply. Running Bear extended his hand, and Samuel shook it, sealing a pact that would change both their lives forever. But as the Apache war party prepared to leave, taking Crawford with them, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that they were all walking into a trap. In the distance, he could see more dust clouds on the horizon, riders approaching from the direction of Fort Bowie. The army was coming, and they were coming fast. Can I continue with Chapter 4? The Peace Council and final confrontation are approaching. Chapter 4. The Peace Council. Dragoon Springs sat in a natural basin surrounded by towering rock formations, a place that had served as neutral ground for generations of Apache and Mexican traders. Now, as Samuel rode toward the gathering with Ayana at his side, he could see the military precision of the army encampment spread across the valley floor. Colonel Mackenzie had brought nearly 200 soldiers to what was supposed to be a peace council. Their blue uniforms stood out starkly against the red earth, and the gleaming brass of their weapons caught the morning sun like signals of war. Ayana, riding side-saddle due to her healing injuries, observed the scene with troubled eyes. "My father was right to be cautious," she said quietly. "This doesn't look like a council. It looks like a show of force." Samuel had to agree. In 2 days since the confrontation at his ranch, word had spread throughout the territory like wildfire. The official version, as reported by the territorial newspapers, painted a very different picture than reality. Apache raiders attack peaceful ranch. Honest settler fights off savage attack. The truth had been twisted beyond recognition. Samuel was being hailed as a hero for defending his property against Apache raiders, while the real story, that he'd harbored Running Bear's daughter and fought alongside Apache warriors against slave traders, had been buried under layers of political convenience. But today, at this council, the truth would finally come out. They approached the Apache camp, situated on the opposite side of the springs from the army. Running Bear's delegation was smaller, only 30 warriors, but their presence commanded respect. The chief sat his horse with quiet dignity, his traditional regalia a stark contrast to the military uniforms across the valley. "Samuel Hayes," Running Bear greeted him formally as they approached. "You came. I was not certain you would." "I gave my word," Samuel replied simply, dismounting and helping Ayana down from her horse. Grey Wolf rode up, his face grim. "The army colonel sent a message. He says any white man who comes to council with Apache will be considered a traitor to his race." Samuel felt a chill run down his spine, but his resolve didn't waver. "Then I guess I'm a traitor." The actual council convened at noon, in the shade of a massive cottonwood tree that had stood witness to countless such meetings. Colonel Mackenzie, a career soldier with steel-gray hair and cold blue eyes, sat at a field table flanked by his officers and a government representative from Washington, a thin man named Hartwell, who kept checking his pocket watch as if he had somewhere more important to be. Running Bear sat cross-legged on a blanket across from them, his council of elders arranged around him. Samuel found himself in an awkward middle ground, trusted by neither side, but essential to both. Colonel Mackenzie opened the proceedings with barely concealed impatience. "Chief Running Bear, you know why we're here. The government is prepared to offer your people food, shelter, and protection on the San Carlos reservation. In return, you will cease all hostile activities and move your tribe peacefully." Running Bear's response was measured and dignified. "Colonel, my people have lived in these mountains for generations beyond counting. We have tried to live in peace with the white settlers, but peace requires honor from both sides." "Honor?" Mackenzie's voice carried a sharp edge. "Your warriors attacked a peaceful ranch just 2 days ago. If not for the heroic defense mounted by Mr. Hayes here, innocent people would have died." Samuel felt every eye in the gathering turn to him. This was his moment. He could play along with the false narrative and be celebrated as a hero, or he could tell the truth and face the consequences. "Colonel," Samuel said, standing slowly, "that's not what happened." The silence that followed was deafening. Mackenzie's face darkened. "Excuse me? I said that's not what happened. The Apache didn't attack my ranch. They saved it." What followed was chaos. Mackenzie shot to his feet, his officers reaching for their weapons. Several soldiers moved closer, their hands on their rifle stocks, but Samuel continued speaking, his voice carrying clearly across the gathering. 2 days ago, I found Chief Running Bear's daughter left for dead in Devil's Canyon. She'd been attacked by slave traders, white men led by a criminal named Crawford who was posing as a federal marshal. These men had killed her escort and planned to sell her to the highest bidder. Hartwell, the government representative, leaned forward with interest. You're saying a federal officer was involved in slave trading. I'm saying a criminal was wearing a federal badge, Samuel replied. When I took the girl in and nursed her back to health, Crawford came to my ranch with armed men, demanding I turn her over. They weren't lawmen, they were killers and slavers. Ayana rose gracefully and moved to stand beside Samuel. Her presence caused a stir among the soldiers, many of whom were seeing an Apache woman for the first time, but her beauty and dignity were undeniable, and when she spoke, her voice carried the same quiet authority as her father's. Gentlemen, she said in perfect English, I am Ayana Delgado, daughter of Chief Running Bear. Everything Mr. Hayes has told you is true. He risked his life and his property to protect me from men who would have sold me like livestock. When my father's warriors arrived, it was not to attack innocent people, but to rescue me from the real criminals. Colonel Mackenzie's face was red with anger. This is preposterous. You expect us to believe that a respected rancher would harbor Apache fugitives, that federal officers are involved in slave trading. The evidence is sitting in your own stockade, Samuel replied calmly. Crawford and the surviving members of his gang are in custody at Fort Bowie. Question them under oath, and you'll learn the truth. Grey Wolf stepped forward, producing a leather pouch. We found this on one of the dead slavers, he said, emptying the contents onto the ground. Gold coins, Mexican silver, and most damning of all, bills of sale. Human bills of sale with Crawford's signature at the bottom. The government representative examined the documents with growing alarm. Colonel, if these are authentic, they could be forgeries, Mackenzie insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Running Bear spoke for the first time since the accusations began. Colonel Mackenzie, you speak of honor. Where is the honor in denying the truth when it stands before you? This white man risked everything to save my daughter. He could have turned her over to the slavers and been rewarded. Instead, he chose to do what was right, even knowing it might cost him his life. The chief stood, his presence commanding attention from every person in the gathering. For 20 years, I have tried to find a path to peace. I have seen my people driven from their homes, their children taken to distant schools, their sacred places desecrated. I have watched as broken treaties piled up like autumn leaves. But in this man, he gestured toward Samuel, I have found something I thought no longer existed. A white man who values honor above profit, truth above convenience. Ayana stepped forward. Father speaks truly, but there is more at stake here than just my rescue. The slave trade in Apache women and children has been going on for years, protected by corrupt officials and ignored by honest ones. How many daughters, how many sons have disappeared into that evil trade while good men looked the other way? Her words hit the gathering like a thunderbolt. Samuel could see several of the officers exchanging uncomfortable glances. The slave trade was an open secret in the borderlands, but one that the military had found convenient to ignore. Hartwell cleared his throat nervously. Miss Delgado, you're making very serious accusations. I'm telling you the truth, Ayana replied firmly. And the truth is that there can never be real peace between our peoples, as long as such evil is allowed to flourish. My father is willing to consider moving our people to the reservation, but only if the government shows that it can be trusted to protect Apache lives with the same vigor it shows in taking Apache land. Colonel Mackenzie was clearly struggling to maintain control of the situation. Even if your story is true, he said finally, it doesn't change the fundamental situation. The Apache must be moved to reservations for their own protection and the safety of white settlers. Running Bear nodded slowly. Perhaps, but not under the current terms. If we are to trust the white man's government, we need white men we can trust to speak for us, men like Samuel Hayes. The colonel's eyes narrowed. What exactly are you proposing? Mr. Hayes has shown that cooperation between our peoples is possible. I propose that he be appointed as an official liaison between the Chiricahua Apache and the territorial government. He would have authority to investigate crimes against my people and ensure that the terms of any treaty are honored. Samuel felt his heart racing. What Running Bear was proposing would make him a target for every corrupt official and criminal in the territory, but it would also give him the power to make a real difference. I accept, and he said before anyone could object. Mackenzie looked like he'd swallowed a rattlesnake. This is highly irregular. The appointment of Indian agents requires approval from Washington. Hartwell was studying the documents Grey Wolf had provided with growing interest. Actually, Colonel, given the evidence of corruption in the current system, a temporary appointment might be exactly what's needed. I have authority to make such appointments in emergency situations. The rest of the council proceeded in a much different atmosphere than it had begun. With Samuel serving as translator and advocate, Running Bear negotiated terms that would allow his people to maintain some dignity and autonomy even on the reservation. It wasn't perfect. No treaty ever was, but it was honest, and it offered hope. As the sun began to set over Dragoon Springs, Samuel found himself sitting beside the cottonwood tree, watching as Apache and Army representatives worked out the final details of the agreement. Ayanna approached and sat beside him, her arm still in a sling but her spirit clearly healing. "You realize what you've done?" she asked quietly. "Probably ruined my life." Samuel replied with a wry smile. "No," she said seriously, "you've changed it, and maybe changed the territory too. There will be those who hate you for what you've done today, but there will also be those who respect you for it." Samuel looked across the valley, where Apache and soldiers were sharing a meal for the first time in anyone's memory. It wasn't the end of conflict. Nothing could achieve that overnight, but it was a beginning. "Miss Delgado," he said finally, "what will you do now?" "Your father will be moving to the reservation." She was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about that. The truth is, I belong to both worlds, Apache and Mexican, traditional and modern. Maybe that's exactly what this territory needs right now. Someone who can build bridges between peoples. And where would you do that?" She turned to look at him directly, and Samuel saw something in her dark eyes that made his heart skip a beat. "I was thinking that a ranch like yours might need someone who understands both sides, someone who could help make this liaison position actually work." Before Samuel could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted them. A lone rider was approaching fast from the direction of Fort Bowie, and even in the fading light, Samuel could see the urgency in his pace. The rider proved to be a young cavalry lieutenant, dust-covered and exhausted. He dismounted quickly and hurried to where Colonel Mackenzie stood with his officers. "Sir," the lieutenant saluted sharply, "I have urgent news from Fort Bowie." "What is it, Lieutenant?" "Crawford and his men, sir. They escaped during the prisoner transfer, but before they broke out, Crawford told the guards something. He claims there's going to be an Apache uprising. Says Chief Running Bear is planning to use this peace council as a cover to position warriors for a major attack." Samuel felt his blood turn to ice. Even now, Crawford was trying to destroy any chance for peace. And worse, there were those in the army who would be all too willing to believe his lies. The final test was yet to come. Chapter 5. The Final Stand. The tension at Dragoon Springs shifted like a sudden storm front. Colonel Mackenzie's face hardened as he processed the lieutenant's report, and Samuel could see the fragile peace they'd built beginning to crumble before his eyes. "How many men did Crawford have with him when he escaped?" Mackenzie demanded. "6 survivors from his original gang, sir, plus 3 more who helped break them out. They're armed and dangerous, and they're heading this way." Running Bear had understood enough of the English to grasp the situation. He stood slowly, his weathered face grave. "Colonel, this Crawford seeks to destroy what we have built here today. Do not let him succeed." But Mackenzie was already turning to his officers. "Captain Morrison, prepare the men for defensive positions. If there's going to be an Apache attack, we'll be ready for it." "Colonel, wait." Samuel stepped forward urgently. "Can't you see what's happening? Crawford is trying to provoke exactly this response. He wants you to treat the Apache as enemies so the Peace Council fails." "Mr. Hayes," Mackenzie's voice was ice cold, "you may have fooled these people with your sympathizer speeches, but I know a tactical situation when I see one. If Crawford says there's going to be an attack, then we prepare for an attack." Ayanna moved to her father's side, speaking rapidly in Apache. Samuel watched as Running Bear's expression grew darker with each word she spoke. Finally, the chief turned to address the entire gathering. "Colonel Mackenzie, my daughter tells me that your men are taking defensive positions against my people. This is not the action of men who seek peace. It's the action of men who want to survive." Mackenzie replied curtly. "Your friend Crawford warned us about your plans. We're not going to be caught off guard." The irony was bitter. Crawford, the man who had tried to murder Ayanna and sell her into slavery, was now being believed over the very people who had exposed his crimes. Samuel could see the situation spiraling toward disaster. That's when the first shot rang out. It came from the rocks above the springs, a sharp crack that echoed off the canyon walls. One of the army sentries cried out and fell, blood spreading across his blue uniform. In the chaos that followed, Samuel heard Crawford's voice shouting from the heights, "Attack! The Apache are attacking! Kill them all!" What happened next was exactly what Crawford had planned. Panicked soldiers opened fire on the Apache camp, while Running Bear's warriors, thinking they were under attack, returned fire in self-defense. The carefully negotiated peace dissolved in gunpowder and blood. Samuel found himself caught in the middle of a 3-way battle. Crawford's men, positioned in the rocks above, were firing down on both the army and the Apache, while the two sides that should have been allies were shooting at each other in the confusion. "Stop!" Samuel shouted, standing in the open ground between the camps. "This is what Crawford wants. He's the one shooting at both sides." But his voice was lost in the chaos of battle. A bullet whined past his ear, and he dove for cover behind an overturned wagon. From there, He could see Ayana helping wounded Apache warriors while her father tried to restore order among his men. The battle might have continued until everyone was dead, but Samuel noticed something that gave him hope. Some of the soldiers, the younger ones who had listened to the peace council, were beginning to realize that the Apache weren't advancing or pressing their attack. They were defending themselves, not launching an assault, and some of the Apache warriors, led by Grey Wolf, had spotted Crawford's muzzle flashes in the rocks and were directing their fire upward rather than at the soldiers. Samuel made a decision that would either end the fighting or get him killed. He stood up in full view of both sides and began walking toward the Apache camp, his hands raised, but his voice carrying clearly, "Running Bear, Grey Wolf, Crawford is in the rocks above us. He's shooting at both sides to make us fight each other." A soldier's rifle swung toward him, but the young lieutenant who had brought the news grabbed the barrel. "Hold your fire! That man's trying to stop this." Samuel reached the Apache line just as Grey Wolf confirmed what he'd suspected. The shots from above, they are not Apache weapons. They are army carbines. Crawford must have taken them from the fort when he escaped, Samuel realized. He's using army weapons to make it look like soldiers are shooting at their own men, and Apache weapons to make it look like your people are attacking. Running Bear's eyes blazed with understanding and fury. "Grey Wolf, take 5 men. Circle around behind the rocks, but do not kill Crawford. We need him alive to tell the truth." The tide of battle turned quickly once the real enemy was identified. Apache warriors, with their superior knowledge of the terrain, scaled the canyon walls like ghosts, while Samuel worked to convince the army officers to cease fire against the Apache camp. The fighting ended as suddenly as it had begun, when Grey Wolf's voice echoed from the rocks above. "We have them." Crawford and his remaining men were marched down from their positions at gunpoint, their faces sullen with defeat. The slavers' scheme had come close to working. Too close. Several men lay wounded or dead from the brief but vicious exchange. Colonel Mackenzie approached Crawford with barely controlled rage. "You son of a bitch! You started a war to cover your crimes." Crawford's sneer was unrepentant. "There's always been a war, Colonel. I just tried to finish it properly. These savages don't belong in civilized territory. The only savage I see here is you," Ayana said quietly, stepping forward. Her dress was stained with blood from helping the wounded, but her voice was steady. "You would have destroyed innocent lives on both sides just to escape justice for your crimes." Samuel moved to stand beside her, and together they faced the man who had nearly destroyed everything they'd worked for. "Crawford, it's over. The truth is out. The Peace Council has succeeded despite your efforts, and you're going to face justice for what you've done." But Crawford's eyes held one last malicious gleam. "You think this changes anything? You think one treaty, one handshake between a savage chief and a bleeding heart rancher is going to bring peace to this territory? There are dozens of men like me out here, Hayes, and next time they won't be so careless." He was right, and Samuel knew it. This was just one battle in a much larger war between those who sought peace and those who profited from conflict. But it was a battle they had won, and sometimes that was enough to build hope upon. As Crawford and his men were led away in chains, Colonel Mackenzie approached Samuel with something that might have been respect in his eyes. "Hayes, I owe you an apology, and perhaps something more than that." He glanced toward Running Bear, who was directing his men in caring for the wounded. "This liaison position that was discussed, I think it might be exactly what this territory needs." "Colonel," Samuel replied, "I appreciate that, but if I'm going to do this job, I need your word that it will be done honestly. No more looking the other way when crimes are committed against the Apache people." Mackenzie nodded slowly. "I'll have it. And Hayes, thank you for preventing a war that would have cost hundreds of lives." As the sun set over Dragoon Springs for the second time since the council began, Samuel found himself once again sitting beneath the ancient cottonwood tree. But this time he wasn't alone. Ayana sat beside him, her injured arm finally free of its sling, watching as Apache and army personnel worked together to tend the wounded and prepare for departure. "So," she said quietly, "it seems you're going to be a very important man in this territory." "Seems that way," Samuel agreed, "though I suspect it's going to be the hardest job I've ever had." "You won't be doing it alone," she said, and when he looked at her questioningly, she smiled. "Someone needs to teach you proper Apache protocol if you're going to be a liaison, and someone needs to help bridge the gap between the two cultures. Are you applying for the position, Miss Delgado?" "I'm accepting it, Mr. Hayes, if you'll have me." Samuel looked into her dark eyes and saw not just beauty, but strength, intelligence, and a spirit that had survived horrors and emerged stronger. In saving her life in Devil's Canyon, he had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for, a partner worthy of the challenges ahead. "Well, I'd be honored," he said simply. Running Bear approached them as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The chief looked older than his years, worn down by decades of conflict and loss, but there was something like peace in his weathered features. "Samuel Hayes," he said formally, "you have proven yourself a friend to the Chiricahua people. My daughter has chosen to walk between two worlds, and I can think of no better man to walk that path beside her." The chief's blessing was both an honor and a responsibility that Samuel felt deeply. "Chief Running Bear, I give you my word that I'll do everything in my power to ensure that this peace we've built survives and grows stronger." "I believe you will," Running Bear replied. "But remember, peace is not something you achieve once and then forget about. It must be built new every day. With every decision, every act of fairness, every moment when you choose understanding over fear." As the Apache and Army camps prepared for departure the next morning, the Apache to begin their difficult journey to the reservation, the soldiers to return to Fort Bowie with their prisoners, Samuel and Ayanna stood together watching the sun rise over the desert landscape they both loved. The Broken Arrow Ranch would become more than just a cattle operation now. It would be a symbol of what was possible when people of different cultures chose to work together rather than fight each other. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, conflicts, and those who opposed change, but they had proven that peace was possible, even in the most unlikely circumstances. As they mounted their horses for the ride home, Ayanna turned to Samuel with a smile that held all the promise of their uncertain but hopeful future. "Ready to change the world, Mr. Hayes?" Samuel looked back at Dragoon Springs one last time, where an ancient cottonwood tree had witnessed the birth of something new, a partnership between peoples that might just reshape the American West. "Ready as I'll ever be, Miss Delgado. Ready as I'll ever be." And as they rode toward home together, the morning sun painted the desert in shades of gold and possibility, promising that some stories of courage and love can indeed change the course of history. The end. Thank you for watching this incredible journey of courage, honor, and love in the Old West. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments what you thought of Samuel and Ayanna's amazing story. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. We love connecting with our global audience. Until next time, keep believing in the power of doing what's right, no matter the cost.